Book of Heaven, Volume 12, Part 2. June 7th, 1917. The soul remains separated from Jesus when she lets something that does not belong to him enter into herself. Finding myself in my usual state, I was lamenting to my sweet Jesus because of his privations, and was saying to him, "What bitter separations! Separated from you, everything is over. I have remained as the most unhappy creature that can exist." And Jesus, interrupting my speaking, told me, "My daughter, what separation are you fishing for? Only when she lets something that does not belong to me enter into herself, then is the soul separated from me. Therefore, I enter into the soul, and if I find her will as my own, her desires, her affections, her thoughts, her heart, everything as my own, I absorb her into myself, and with the fire of my love, I keep liquefying her will with mine, making them one. I liquefy her desires with mine, her affections, her thoughts with mine. And once I have formed one single liquid, I pour it over my whole humanity like celestial dew. And as it forms into as many drops of dew, for as many offenses as I receive, they kiss me, love me, repair me, and embalm my embittered wounds. And since I am in the act of doing good to all, this dew descends for the good of all creatures. But if I find something extraneous in the soul that does not belong to me, then I cannot melt what is hers into mine, because love alone is what has the virtue of melting and becoming one. Things that are similar are those that can mix together, and that have the same value. Therefore, if in the soul there is iron, thorns, stones, how can they melt? And then there are separations, unhappinesses. So if nothing has entered into your heart, how can I separate? June 14th, 1917. The more the soul strips herself of herself, the more Jesus clothes her with himself. Continuing in my usual state, I was praying my lovable Jesus to come into me in order to love, to pray, to repair, for I knew how to do nothing. And sweet Jesus, moved to compassion for my nothingness, came, remaining with me to pray, loving and repairing together with me. And then he said to me, "My daughter, the more the soul strips herself of herself, the more I clothe her with myself. The more she believes she can do nothing, the more I act in her, and I do everything. I feel all my love, my prayers, my reparations, and so forth, being placed in act by the creature. And to give honor to myself, I listen to what she wants to do. Love? I go to her and love together with her. Does she want to pray? I pray together with her. In sum, her stripping and her love, that is mine, bind me and force me to do with her whatever she wants to do. And I give to the soul the merit of my love, of my prayers and reparations, and to my highest contentment, I feel my life being repeated, and I make the effects of my operating descend for the good of all, because it is not of the creature, who is hidden in me, but it is mine. July 4th, 1917. All the pains of creatures were suffered before by Jesus. The one who does the divine will is together with Jesus in the tabernacle. Continuing in my usual state, I was feeling a little in suffering, and my adorable Jesus, on coming, placed himself in front of me, and it seemed that between me and Jesus, there were many electric wires of communication. And he told me, "My daughter, each pain that the soul suffers is one more communication that the soul acquires. In fact, all the pains that the creature could suffer were suffered before by me in my humanity, and took their place in the divine order. And since the creature cannot suffer them altogether, my goodness communicates them little by little, and as it communicates them, the chains of union with me keep growing. And not only with pains, but with anything good that the creature can do. So do the links of connection develop between me and her." Another day I was thinking to myself of the good that other souls receive by being in front of the most holy sacrament, while I, poor one, was deprived of it. And blessed Jesus told me, "My daughter, the one who does my will is together with me in the tabernacle, and takes part in my pains, in the coldness, in the irreverences, in everything that the very souls who are in my sacramental presence do. The one who does my will must excel in everything, and the place of honor is always reserved for her. Therefore, who receives more good, the one who is before me, or the one who is with me? For the one who does my will, I do not tolerate even one step of distance between me and her, or division of pains or of joys. I may keep her on the cross, but always with me. This is why, then, I want you always in my will, to give you the first place over my sacramental heart. I want to feel your heart palpitating in mine, with my own love and pain. I want to feel your will in mine, that multiplying in everyone may give me, with one single act, the reparations of all, and the love of all. And my will in yours, that making your poor humanity my own, may elevate it before the majesty of the Father as my continued victim." July 7th, 1917. For the one who does the divine will, everything is present. I was fusing myself in my sweet Jesus, but I saw myself as so meager that I didn't know what to give him. And the always lovable Jesus, to console me, told me, "My daughter, for the one who does my will, there is no past or future, but everything is present in act. And just as everything I did and suffered is all present in act, in such a way that, if I want to give satisfaction to the Father, or do good to creatures, I can do it, as if in act I were suffering and operating. In the same way, what the creature can do or suffer in my will is already identified with my pains and with my works, and they become one. And when the soul wants to give me an attestation of love with her pains, she can take the pains suffered at other times that are in act and give them to me in order to replicate her love, her satisfactions for me. And I, in seeing the industriousness of the creature who places her acts as though in a bank, in order to multiply them and collect the interest, to give me love and satisfactions, so as to enrich her more, and not to be outdone in love, I shall give her my pains, my works multiplied, to give her love and to be loved. July 18th, 1917. The soul who lives in the divine will lives in Jesus and at his expense. Continuing in my usual state, I was trying to pour all of myself into the holy will of Jesus, and I prayed him to pour all of himself into me, in such a way that I would no longer feel myself, but the whole of Jesus. And blessed Jesus came and told me, "My daughter, when the soul lives in my will, and everything she does in my volition, I feel her everywhere. I feel her in my mind, and her thoughts flow within mine. And as I diffuse the life of intelligence in the creatures, she diffuses herself together with me in the minds of the creatures. And as she sees me being offended, she feels my pain. I feel in her my heartbeat. Even more, I feel one heartbeat for two inside my heart. And as my love pours into creatures, she pours herself together with me, and she loves with me. And if I am not loved, she loves me for all, to requite me in love, and she consoles me. In my desires, I feel the desire of the soul who lives in my will. In my works, I feel hers. In everything. Therefore, one can say that she lives at my expense. And I, my love, you do everything by yourself, and do not need the creature. Why, then, do you love so much that the creature live in your will and of your will? And Jesus, indeed, I have need of nothing, and do everything by myself. But love, in order to have life, wants its outpouring. Imagine a sun that has no need of light. It is sufficient for itself and for others. But still, since there are other little lights, even though it does not need them, it wants them within itself for company, to pour itself out, and to enlarge the little lights. What wrong would the little lights not do if they refused? Ah, my daughter, when the will is alone, it is always sterile. Love, when isolated, languishes and dies down. And I love the creature so much that I want her united with my will, so as to render her fecund, to give her life of love. Then do I find my outpouring, because I created the creature only to pour myself out in love, for nothing else. And therefore this is all my commitment. July 25th, 1917. Jesus purifies the soul in order to admit her to live in his will. Continuing in my usual state, I was lamenting to Jesus, and I also prayed him to put an end to the many chastisements. And Jesus told me, "My daughter, you lament? Yet this is still nothing. The great chastisements shall come." The creature has rendered herself unbearable. Under the blows, she rebels more. Even more, she does not want to recognize my hand that strikes her. I have no other means to use than to exterminate her. In this way, I shall be able to remove many lives that infect the earth and kill my growing generation. Therefore, do not expect an end for now, but rather more and worse evils. There shall not be one place on earth that shall not be soaked in blood. On hearing this, I felt my heart being lacerated, and Jesus, wanting to cheer me, told me, "My daughter, come into my will to do what I do, and in my will you shall be able to run for the good of all creatures. And from within the blood in which they are swimming, you shall be able to save them with the power of my volition, in such a way as to bring them to me, washed by their own blood, with the touch of my will." And my life, I am so bad. How can I do this? And he, "You must know that the most noble, the most sublime, the greatest, the most heroic act is to do my will and to operate in my volition. So at this act, that no other will be able to equal, I make display of all my love and generosity. And as soon as the soul decides to do it, I, in order to give her the honor of keeping her in my volition, in the act in which the two wills meet to be fused into each other and become one, if she is stained, I purify her. If the thorns of the human nature enwrap her, I shatter them. And if some nail pierces her, that is sin, I pulverize it, because nothing evil can enter my will. Even more, all my attributes invest her and change weakness into fortitude, ignorance into wisdom, misery into richness, and so with all the rest. In the other acts, something from herself always remains, but in these, she remains completely stripped of herself, and I fill her completely with myself." August 6, 1917. The divine will renders the soul happy, even in the midst of the greatest storms. Continuing in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus came, and since I was very afflicted, because of the continuous threats of worse chastisements, and because of his privations, he told me, "My daughter, be cheered. Do not lose heart too much. My will renders the soul happy, even in the midst of the greatest storms. Even more, she rises so high that the storms cannot touch her, though she sees them and hears them. The place in which she dwells is not subject to storms, but is always serene and smiling sun, because her origin is in heaven. Her nobility is divine. Her sanctity is in God, in which she is kept by God himself, because jealous of the sanctity of this soul who lives in my will. I keep her in my inmost heart, and I say, nobody touch her. My will is untouchable, it is sacred, and all must give honor to my will." August 14th, 1917. Jesus did nothing other than give himself prey to the will of the Father. Difference between living resigned to the will of God and living in the divine will. As I was in my usual state, my sweet Jesus came for just a little, and flying past, and told me, "My daughter, I did nothing other than give myself prey to the will of the Father. So if I thought in the mind of the Father. If I spoke in the mouth and with the tongue of the Father. If I worked in the hands of the Father. Even my breath I breathed in him, and everything I did was ordered as he wanted. Therefore I could say that I carried out my life in the Father, and I was the bearer of the Father, because I enclosed everything in his will, and I did nothing by myself. My main point was the will of the Father, because I did not care about myself, nor did I interrupt my course because of the offenses they gave me. But I kept flying more and more toward my center, and only when I fulfilled the will of the Father in everything, then did my natural life end. The same for you, my daughter. If you give yourself prey to my will, you shall have no more concern for anything. The very privation of me that torments you and consumes you so much, flowing in my will, shall find support, my hidden kisses, my life in you, clothed with you. In your very heartbeat you shall feel mine, burning and sorrowful. And if you do not see me, you feel me. My arms hold you tightly. And how many times do you not feel my motion, my refreshing breath that refreshes your ardors? You do feel all this, and when you try to see who squeezed you, who breathes on you, and you do not see me, I smile at you. I kiss you with the kisses of my will, and I hide more within you, in order to surprise you again and to give you one more jump into my will. Therefore do not sadden me by afflicting yourself, but let me do. Let the flight of my volition never cease in you, otherwise you would hinder my life in you, while by the living in my will I do not find any hindrance, and I make my life grow, and I carry it out as I want. Now, in order to obey, I want to say a few words on the difference between living resigned to the divine will and living in the divine will. First, living resigned. According to my poor opinion, this means to resign oneself to the divine will in everything, both in prosperous and in adverse circumstances, looking at the divine will in all things, the order of the divine dispositions that it has over all creatures, such that not even one hair can fall from our head if the Lord does not want it so. It seems to me like a good son who goes wherever his father wants and suffers whatever his father wants. Poor or rich, it is indifferent to him. He is content only with being what the Father wants. If he receives or asks for an order to go somewhere for the fulfillment of some business, he goes only because the Father wanted it. But in the meantime, he must take some refreshment, stop to rest, have some food, deal with people. Therefore he has to put in much of his own will, even though he goes because the Father wanted it. However, in many things he finds himself in the circumstance of doing them by himself. So he may be far away from the Father for days, for months, without receiving specification of the will of the Father in all things. So for the one who lives resigned to the divine will, it is almost impossible not to mix his own will with it. He may be a good son, but shall not have in everything the thoughts, the words, the life of the Father fully portrayed in him. In fact, since he has to go, return, follow, deal with others, love is already broken, because only continued union makes love grow, and it never breaks. And the current of the will of the Father is not in continuous communication with the current of the will of the Son. And in those intervals, the Son may get used to doing his own will. However, I believe that this is the first step toward sanctity. Second, living in the divine will. I would like the hand of my Jesus to write this. He alone could tell all the beauty, the goodness, and the sanctity of living in the divine will. I am incapable. I have many concepts about it in my mind, but I lack the words. My Jesus, pour yourself into my word, and I shall say what I can. Living in the divine will means being inseparable, doing nothing by oneself, because before the divine will, one feels incapable of anything. He does not ask for orders, nor does he receive them, because he feels incapable of going on his own. And he says, "If you want me to do this, let us do it together. And if you want me to go, let us go together." So, he does all that his Father does. If the Father thinks, he makes the thoughts of the Father his own, and has not one thought more than those of the Father. If the Father looks, if he speaks, if he works, if he walks, if he suffers, if he loves, he too looks at what the Father looks at, repeats the words of the Father, works with the hands of the Father, walks with the feet of the Father, suffers the same pains of the Father, and loves with the love of the Father. He lives, not outside, but inside the Father. Therefore he is the reflection and the perfect portrait of the Father. That is not for one who lives only resigned. It is impossible to find this Son without the Father, or the Father without him, and not only externally, but all his interior is as though interwoven with the interior of the Father, transformed, dissolved completely in God. Oh, the rapid and sublime flights of this child in the divine will! This divine volition is immense. In every instant it circulates in everyone. It gives life to everything, and orders everything. And the soul, moving within this immensity, flies to all, helps all, loves all, but as Jesus himself helps and loves. That one who lives only resigned cannot do. Therefore the one who lives in the divine will finds it impossible to act on his own. Even more, he feels nausea for his human operating, be it even holy, because in the divine will, all things, even the smallest ones, take on a different look. They acquire nobility, splendor, divine sanctity, divine power and beauty. They multiply to infinity, and in one instant one does everything. And after he has done everything, he says, "I have done nothing. Jesus did it. And this is all my contentment, that meager as I am, Jesus has given me the honor to keep me in the divine will, to let me do what he himself has done." So the enemy cannot bother this child, whether he has done well or badly, little or much, because Jesus himself did everything, and he together with Jesus. He is the most peaceful. He is not subject to anxiety. He loves no one and loves everyone, but divinely. It can be said that he is the repeater of the life of Jesus, the organ of his voice, the heartbeat of his heart, the sea of his graces. True sanctity, I believe, consists only in this. All other things are shadows, larvae, specters of sanctity. In the divine will, virtues take their place in the divine order, while outside of it in the human order, they are subject to self-esteem, to vainglory, to passions. Oh, how many good works, how many attended sacraments, hard to be cried over before God, and to be repaired for, because they are empty of divine will, and therefore without fruits. Heaven willing that all would comprehend true sanctity. Oh, how all other things would disappear. Therefore many find themselves on the false way of sanctity. Many place it in the pious practices of piety, and woe to those who move them. Oh, how they deceive themselves, if their wills are not united with Jesus, and also transformed in him. That is continual prayer. With all their pious practices, their sanctity is false. And it shows how these souls pass very easily from pious practices to defects, to amusements, to the sowing of discord, and other things. Oh, how dishonored is this kind of sanctity! Others place it in going to church, to attend all the services, but their will is far from Jesus. And it shows how these souls have little care for their own duties. And if they are hindered, they get angry. They cry that their sanctity goes up in the air. They lament. They disobey. They are the wounds of the families. Oh, what false sanctity! Others place it in frequent confessions, in minute spiritual directions, in having scruples about everything. But then they have no scruple that their will does not run together with the will of Jesus, and woe to those who contradict them. These souls are like inflated balloons. A little hole is enough for the air to come out, and their sanctity goes up in smoke and falls to the ground. These poor balloons have always something to say. They are mostly inclined to sadness. They live always in doubt, and therefore would like to have a director for themselves, who would advise them, give them peace, and console them in every little thing. But they are soon more agitated than before. Poor sanctity, how forged it is. I would like the tears of my Jesus to cry together with him over these false sanctities, and make everyone know how true sanctity is in doing the divine will and in living in the divine volition. This sanctity sinks its roots so deep that there is no danger that it may oscillate, because it fills earth and heaven, and everywhere it finds its support. This soul is firm, not subject to inconstancies, to voluntary defects. She is attentive to her duties. She is the most sacrificed, detached from everyone and from everything, even from directions themselves. And since the roots are deep, she rises so high that the flowers and fruits bloom in heaven. And she is so hidden in God that the earth sees little or nothing of this soul. The divine will keeps her absorbed within itself. Only Jesus is the author, the life, the form of the sanctity of this enviable creature. She has nothing of her own, but everything is in common with Jesus. Her passion is the divine will. Her characteristic is the will of her Jesus. And the Fiat is her continuous motto. On the other hand, the poor and false sanctity of the balloons is subject to continuous inconstancies, and while it seems that the balloons of their sanctity swell so much as to seem to be flying in the air at a certain height, to the point that many, and even the directors, are amazed, soon they are disillusioned. One humiliation, one preference of the directors toward someone else, is enough to make these balloons deflate, for they believe this is a theft against them, considering themselves the neediest. Therefore, while having scruples about trifles, they then reach the point of disobeying. Jealousy is the woodworm of these balloons, that, consuming the good they do, keeps sucking air from them, and the poor balloon deflates and falls to the ground, reaching the point of dirtying itself with earth. Then the sanctity that was in the balloon appears, and what does one find? Love of self, resentment, passions hidden under the aspect of good, almost to have occasion to say, they have made themselves the amusement of the devil. So of all their sanctity, nothing was found but a mass of defects, apparently disguised as virtues. But then who can say everything? Only Jesus knows the worst evils of this false sanctity, of this devout life without foundation, because it leans on false piety. These false sanctities are the spiritual lives without fruit, sterile, that are the cause of who knows how much crying for my lovable Jesus. They are the ill feeling of society, the worries of their very directors, and of families. It can be said that they bring with themselves a noxious air that harms everyone. Oh, how so very different is the sanctity of the soul who lives in the divine will. These souls are the smile of Jesus. They are far away from everyone, even from the very directors. Only Jesus is everything for them. Therefore, nobody worries because of them. The beneficial air that they possess embalms all. They are the order and the harmony of all. Jesus, jealous of these souls, makes himself actor and spectator of whatever they do. There is not one heartbeat, breath, or thought that he does not regulate and dominate. Jesus keeps this soul so absorbed in the divine will that she can hardly remember that she is living in the exile. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 12, Part 2. Fiat.